What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some highlights from Steam's ongoing turn-based RPG fest, continuing from now until October 7th, though it started a day or two ago, as I am a tiny bit behind, seeing as it launched when a few other things were happening that I needed to get to first, but seeing as a very large portion of the games I play just so happen to be turn-based RPGs, it made sense to cover this and talk about some of the discounts that are available primarily, but also a few other things like demos for upcoming games such as Guild Saga. But a few things to note right away. I'm mostly talking in US dollars because that is where I am from, and there's simply too much information there to collate in terms of regional pricing for everybody else, as that would simply take more resources than I have, frankly. What's more though, a lot of the games I'm going to mention here are games I have reviewed previously if you'd like more in-depth information about them, because we're going to be moving relatively quick here, as we have quite a few games to get through. Though, most notably, right here at the beginning, you can find good discounts on both Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader and Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, two great games from Owlcat Games, which I have covered extensively. Wrath of the Righteous remains one of my favorite games of all time, with you being able to pick up that one for 70% off for the most part, with some of its DLC being a little less, but you can pick up the base game and all of its DLC for I think right around $30, or just the base game at $12, which is a very cheap price to pay for a game I spent like 700, 800 hours with. But then we have Rogue Trader, a much more recent title, as it launched in full last year in December, but just recently got its Void Shadows DLC, which added a bunch more content to the base game. And you can buy the base game itself for 40% off, putting that at $30. And they also have the Season Pass discounted for $18, which will actually give you the first DLC for its full price of $18, while also guaranteeing you access to the second one that still has yet to come out. So even if you want to wait for that release to actually jump in and play the game, you could get a pretty good deal on it right this second, if you preferred. But let's move on a little bit. Next up, I wanted to mention that there is Octopath Traveller 2, available for just $35, putting it at 40% off. A tremendous JRPG, a fantastic game to play on the Steam Deck, actually. One of my favorite game releases of last year. It is a fantastic JRPG, covering the stories of 8 individual heroes before it comes together to tie into nicely, with all sorts of content and discoveries to be had. $35 for that one is absolutely a bargain. But I would be remiss not to mention the classics like the Xcom series. In particular, you can pick up Xcom 2 during this little sale for I think it's like $3, or you could pick up Xcom Enemy Unknown for the same. Following on from that, we have For the King 2, which also released late last year, at a 40% discount, putting this one at $15. It looks like now might be a pretty good time to jump into this one, as it had a little bit of a rocky start, but has since seen some updates and things that really polished it up and made it a lot more fun. But if you're unaware, For the King 2 is a sort of turn-based roguelike game that aims to recreate tabletop RPGs, with naturally some fun twists and whatnot. So it seems like that one is in a pretty enjoyable place these days. Now, kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum from that, however, we then have Midnight Suns, a big AAA release for the X-Men, at 75% off, putting it at $15. The combat in this one is tremendous. I actually really enjoyed the card-based hero combat here, which I did not think I would enjoy going into it. However, on the flip side of that, the game has a sort of friendship simulator for the heroes in between missions that I did not enjoy quite as much personally, which is why I gave the game a buy on sale when it initially released. But at $15, I think that's a tremendous value for that one, and definitely worth taking a look at. Now, in a somewhat similar vein, we then have Triangle Strategy, a fantastic TRPG that has a bunch of different outcomes and things based on choices you make throughout the story, which is where you're going to get the most out of it, because it is very heavy on that story. So unless you want to run through the game about 3 times to see all the different endings, it can be a little pricey. But thankfully, a sale of 60% off, putting it at $24, is a pretty good way to make that much more palatable. Now, somewhat surprisingly to me, actually, we then have Eiyuden Chronicle, 100 Heroes, that launched back in April, and you can already find this one at 35% off, putting it at about $32, which is a pretty good value on that one. But this title sees you taking control of, potentially, about 100 heroes, though many of them play a big role in the town you'll be building along the way, as this is effectively a spiritual successor to the Suikoden JRPGs of yesteryear. Speaking of older titles, though, we then have Tactics Ogre. Tactics Ogre is one of those TRPGs that is somewhat genre-defining. You'll often see it mentioned as one of the greats, but In particular, I'm talking about Tactics Ogre Reborn, which is a remake of that title, available for 50% off, bringing it down to $25, which is a pretty great price to check out. Again, one of the more historically important CRPGs you could play, in a format that's pretty accessible for modern hardware, etc. Moving on though, we then have Colony Ship and Age of Decadence, both, I would say, relatively niche CRPGs from Iron Tower Studios, Colony Ship being the newer one, which is available for 40% off at $24, which tells a story about your character who is born upon a generational ship in the stars headed towards a distant planet with no real expectation that you'll be alive when the ship finally reaches it. And it tells a really great story about the, of course, nuances of life on that ship and all the differing factions that have evolved in the time since its initial departure towards its destination. Age of Decadence is also on sale as well, which is that developer's previous work, which is a little more difficult to get into, frankly, but luckily there is a demo available for that one, which I would highly recommend you play before buying it for yourself, even at the price of $6, as again, that one's pretty niche. Now, on the contrary, as a spin-off to a much more popular franchise, we then have Ruined King, a League of Legends spin-off, which is effectively a JRPG about some of its characters that I reviewed when it released, and truth be told, I kind of wasn't expecting much given that it's a spin-off. My hopes were not high for its quality, only to be pleasantly surprised at how good that game actually is. With a relatively unique battle system and a good story, I think at 50% off, putting it at $15, makes for a pretty fun time. Last on our list though, we then have Circus Electrique. Now this is a turn-based RPG kind of in the vein of something like Darkest Dungeon, which might be a little bit of an odd comparison because this one is very bright and cheery in contrast, though it sees you running a circus in like sort of Victorian era London where you're dealing with steampunk creations gone wrong attacking citizens that bizarrely enough your circus winds up being at the very heart of. And while I do think this game loses steam a bit, especially towards the end, pun very much so intended, at 65% off, putting it at $7, I think that one might just be a sort of little different title for you to check out if you're looking for something kind of fresh. But that is pretty much going to do it for this particular video and talking about some of the highlights from this turn-based RPG fest, though I would love to hear what you think about it down in the comment section below, especially if you have any other games you'd like to share, as honestly there are so many here it's impossible to cover them all. So if there's any good deals or anything like that you spotted, again, would love to hear about it, which naturally means to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.